One of the groups that we talk to a lot, and you know, Jonathan Ailing from the Free Speech Union, I feel like they're fellow travellers, and they have got brought a very special guest out to New Zealand to speak about and to free speech. Her name is Professor Nadine Strossen. I'm going to call her Nadine, and I hope I've got her the surname right. She's American. She's a civil liberties activist. She served as president of the American Civil Liberties Union, the ACLU, very important organisation, from 1991 to 2008. She is the daughter of a Holocaust survivor, and she spent most of her life advocating for civil liberties, including, of course, I think that most fundamental starting point of civil liberties is the freedom of speech, which gives you the freedom of thought, which creates democracy. So, Nadine, can I just say a very, very warm welcome to the platform and to New Zealand.
Sean, I'm so delighted to be here, and thank you for providing not only your own eloquent voice in support of free speech, but for platforming other diverse voices.
Yeah. Look, we've had a very interesting 3 weeks in this country, and I was looking, I don't know if you've seen the Elon Musk interview with the BBC this morning.
No, I didn't.
And I didn't realise this about 6 weeks ago when I noticed that what I broadly call the woke left, and I know it's a blunt way to describe them, going nuts over the fact that Elon Musk had purchased Twitter. And I really didn't understand what they were on about. And they were all running off to join a group called Mastodon, and this was the death of Twitter. And I think, Nadine, what I realised was that purchase by Elon Musk has literally changed the landscape in which the culture wars and the war for freedom of speech is being fought. It was a significant thing.
Yeah, oh yes. And I and other free speech defenders have weighed in, not so much as defenders of various aspects of Elon Musk's philosophy, but the fact that he said from the beginning that he wanted to promote freedom of speech. And that led to such hysteria, as if freedom of speech is so dangerous, even though Musk said that if the speech is illegal, then it will not be allowed. The other thing that is a really important development, Sean, is the release of the so-called Twitter files, which Musk had promised that he would release this barrage of emails to journalists, including Barry Weiss and Matt Taibbi, who are, I guess, analogous to you, respected journalists who somehow become suspect, especially among those on the left in the United States. That includes powerful Democratic officials, when they dare to have independent thought. And so Musk released this barrage of emails to journalists to analyze and release. And what they document is an incredibly extensive, intricate web of relationships between government agencies in the United States, in particular the Department of Homeland Security, the FBI, other government officials, putting enormous pressure on Twitter to deplatform certain messages and certain speakers.
I got taken down last week. I don't know what happened. I was back in 4 days. But I know that was a coordinated move by a number of people in New Zealand to silence me on Twitter. It was great. I came back, I got like 4,000 new followers. That's a lot in New Zealand over just a few days.
Well, that's the fruits of censorship. But in this case, it has very serious constitutional law consequences, because of private platforms such as Twitter, of course, can set its own policies and can decide to host anyone or not host anyone, any perspective or not host any perspective. That is its own First Amendment free speech right. But if the ostensibly private sector decisions are actually being pressured by the government or in close coordination with the government, that is allowing the government to do an end run around its own First Amendment responsibilities. So,
I must note, you're in a country that doesn't have a constitution, or if we do, we kind of make it up as we go along.
Yeah. So, I mean, this is a very simple principle, and I think of universal significance, which is we want to restrain the government's power to suppress free speech. So government should not be able to discriminate against certain speakers or certain ideas. There's a viewpoint neutrality principle that I know is respected here as it is in the at least in theory. In theory. But a private sector platform, like I have no right to be on your platform. It's a great honor. But if you were pressured by the New Zealand government that said, don't allow Strassen, or if you do, we're going to subject you to all kinds of regulations, that seems to be essentially what's happening in the U.S.
I'll tell you why it's great having someone like you on, is that a whole lot of people, I have occasionally in the last 15 years, which has been the process, I've probably been cancelled 3 times. And people have attempted to cancel me or end my career, and I tend to just get up again and say, I've still got it. But I have had times when I think, am I mad? I'm looking there, the Emperor's got no clothes on. Does no one else see that?
Yeah.
And I get the feeling that increasingly people are saying the Emperor of hate speech, of compelled speech, has no clothes on. A lot of the issues that the world is, the victimhood issues, identity politics is rubbish. And I feel in New Zealand, at least, that the Posey Parker rally and what happened there has really been a turning point. I put that together with Musk. But I'll tell you, the problem we have in New Zealand is that our mainstream news media have become incredibly reliant on government funding. And a philosophical or ideological orthodoxy which accepts identity politics and does not question the woke left has permeated our television, our radio, our major newspapers. And they really have lost the plot.
And that is so crucial in a democracy. In the United States, we have 3 branches of government officially, the legislative, the executive, and the judiciary.
And then
the so-called fourth estate.
Yeah.
The media, which from the beginning has been envisioned as an essential check on government power and abuse of government power. So if the media, in effect, becomes embedded with the government,
which it has,
that is so dangerous, not only to individual liberty, but also to democratic self-government.
Well, research here, and just recently released research from what is generally a left and woke academia, says that public faith in our major media institutions is just screaming down. But can I tell you what the reaction from legacy and mainstream media is? They turn off the comments section. They believe that the way to counter that trend is to essentially try and brainwash or mislead people even harder. And none of them are listening to why people are not trusting them.
And this is why it's so wonderful that at least we have the technological opportunity to create alternative media as you were doing. Now, one of the things that concerns me very much in the United States, well, actually worldwide implications, is the extent to which there can still be gatekeepers online. So there have been, for example, rumblings that Substack was going to deny the opportunity to certain speakers or those who provide very basic infrastructure type services, including financial services. We have a big lawsuit going on in New York where the governor is very hostile. The former governor was very hostile to the National Rifle Association. Say what you may about gun control policies, they are exercising what in our country is a constitutional right, which has been strongly protected by the Supreme Court. And yet the governor issued edicts to major financial institutions saying, do not provide financing services, do not provide credit card services, starve the NRA and other gun rights organizations so they will not be able to function. And interestingly enough, the ACLU, which has never taken a position on gun rights, said this is a First Amendment free speech issue because the next administration that comes along and is anti-abortion, they're going to use the same tactics against Planned Parenthood and other abortion rights organizations. So we have to be very sure that to preserve the opportunity for alternative platforms and media to continue to exist.
Yeah, which is why one of the reasons we built our own app, we try as much as possible not to be reliant on YouTube or Facebook or Twitter, that we are resilient to sort of attack.
In the United States, you probably saw what happened to Parler when it tried to form an alternative platform.
Yeah. Look, I'd also ask, there is a danger in the way this culture works and this debate works, and look, I'll be honest, I look at Fox News and I think they're a bunch of numpties off, and I don't think they're good journalists by my standard of journalism. They are partisan, but they have a right to exist. And at the moment, they're winning the rating wars, right? I also look at other alternate media, and I look at debate around vaccination and mandates and the World Economic Forum and Klaus Schwab. And I'm constantly in this organisation not wanting to be placed in the rabbit hole or fall down it. And I'm trying to search and recreate a reasonable middle ground of what my understanding and my father's understanding of being a journalist was. It's pretty damn hard because everything is so polarised.
Well, it's interesting because I think journalism has a long tradition of being, again, my knowledge is mostly in the United States, so let me confine my observations.
Yeah.
But when the United States was founded, there were just dozens and hundreds and a multiplicity of individual pamphleteers and many, many newspapers, each of which was explicitly partisan. That's why we have a lot of newspapers that still have the name, the Republican, the Democrat. And it wasn't until the 19th century that we had major national newspapers trying to be objective and to appeal to a mass market. And then that broke down with the advent of talk radio, with much more partisan divisions, and cable news appealing to different segments of society. So I don't see that as a tragedy, Sean, so much as an opportunity. We want to make sure that every perspective can be aired, and we want to urge people to seek out information from multiple different sources. Now, we hear a lot about social media having driven people down rabbit holes and into echo chambers, but in fact, I think that is largely a myth. Very respected scholarly institutions that study internet communications, including at Oxford University and major universities in the United States, have studied the media consumption of people who are mostly relying on online sources. And they find that those of us who are online tend to consult more different sources and more diverse sources. It's easier to do.
Yeah. Hey, look, you mentioned academic institutions, and I met Jonathan Haidt when he last came out here, and he's done some fascinating writing on the digital age and probably the generational shift in how we consume information and how we view the world. And I think some of Jonathan's stuff, when you read between the lines and look at it, the empirical evidence he's got, is really disturbing, particularly for young women. And it would seem to me that the elites are going on to universities now which have embraced a really anti-free speech philosophy, and that is that you must be safe at all times. Anything that hurts your feelings is like a physical assault on you. And we must protect people at all times from ideas that might challenge them or cause a bit of cognitive dissonance. And this seems to be really embedded.
I have worked very closely with Jonathan. His expertise and that of other social psychologists and experts in mental health is so important, because in the free speech debate, it tends to be assumed that we have to choose between freedom of speech on the one hand and protecting the mental health and emotional and psychological well-being, especially of young people, especially of young women, on the other hand. And what Jonathan and other social scientists have been able to show is, no, you may think that you are protecting, I'm putting that word in scare quotes, these young people. You may think that shielding them from distressing or upsetting or controversial or even insulting speech is good for their mental well-being, but it is actually the opposite. It is fueling the anxiety and the depression and the suicide. That what we have to do is to make these young people resilient, to embrace and empower their self-confidence. In this era of the pandemic or post-pandemic, Sean, I like to use the immunization analogy. You inject a little bit of the toxic substance, in this case, exposure to upsetting words, not to destroy the person or to undermine their health, but the opposite, to develop their ability to resist and to not allow that toxic idea to undermine their self-confidence, but to empower them to ignore it, to refute it, to respond to it.
Look, I want to talk about the New Zealand perspective. You've obviously come here as a guest of the Free Speech Union, who I think do fine work.
I do too.
Is New Zealand, and I know I've done a couple of things that went viral around the world without the intent of doing that, but I've talked to a few other people. Rita Panahi and Sky News Australia, Piers Morgan has retweeted our stuff, and Jordan Peterson. New Zealand's a very interesting country. We're very small, only 5.8 million people. We can change tack, and if you like, we can change direction. We're like a little laboratory. Do you feel like New Zealand is in trouble?
I have enough humility to not want to opine on a country that I very, very much enjoy visiting, but hardly have expertise about. But there certainly are free speech challenges here that mirror the very serious free speech challenges in my country. And I have been distressed at what I understand here is called the thug's veto. We tend to call it the heckler's veto, that there seems to be some...
It was thugs in Albert Park. I don't know if you've seen the video.
I heard
but
that.
We had a mainstream media... That didn't happen. They reported as a wonderful coming together of the rainbow community. We had a Prime Minister who said he wished he could have been there as part of the mob and did not condemn the violence perpetrated against women. Our police force stood by 20 yards away from where that happened under orders not to intervene.
Yeah. And I've heard that, and I was asked about this and received comments about it, including supportive comments of everything that you've described, Sean, when I spoke at the University of Auckland Law School yesterday. To me, there could not be anything more antithetical to freedom of speech, which entails not only the right of the speaker to convey whatever ideas or information the speaker chooses, but it's also the right of audience members to choose to listen. And all of those rights depend on any protest being confined to peaceful, non-disruptive protests. Of course, I defend that right. But when protest becomes disruptive, such that the speaker can no longer speak and the audience can no longer hear, or worse yet, a physical assault or intimidation, that is, to me, completely inconsistent with the whole basis for civil society and democratic self-government, which depends on a robust but peaceful debate of ideas. Violence is the antithesis.
Nadine, in the week since then, we have, I interviewed Posey Parker before she came here and after that when she was back in Britain, and I dedicated a couple of mornings on the show just to women. They got priority and I let them tell their stories of what happened, and they were most distressing, those stories. But what we also got through was from the so-called rainbow community. And in fact, yesterday we had a 68-year-old, probably the first woman to transition in New Zealand. She did it in Thailand, and Rachel rang and told her story. It now appears that those who assume to represent this particular community, in fact, don't. But they have been allowed to represent that because others in that community who are a gay, transgender, have been too afraid because of the climate of cancel culture to stand up and say, sorry, you don't represent all of us. Your idea of what the community is isn't my idea. And I'm hearing increasingly from people actually in what you would call marginalised groups that they too have been silenced by the extremists in their groups.
You know, I think you and I both celebrate individual liberty, which means by definition celebrating the freedom of choice of each and every individual to think for ourselves, to choose for ourselves, to speak for ourselves. Society may put us in various demographic pigeonholes, but that does not map onto certain ideas. I do not speak for all women, for all feminists, for all Americans, for all Jews, for all liberals, right? And I think it's very insulting to the very groups that were saying, oh, we want to elevate you to equal status and to full participation and belonging in our society, but we're going to relegate you to this pigeonhole. You must think a certain way, or you are not a true fill in the blank. Nothing could be more antithetical to not only individual rights, but equality of human dignity.
Yeah, absolutely. Everyone has human rights, no matter who you are. Look, you brought up another thing I wanted to talk about, and in the context of your personal story, and you are, you're a, what would I call, a descendant of the Holocaust in many ways. And one thing I noted prior to Posey Parker's visit here, there were a group of neo-Nazis, and it's unquite clear exactly who they were, who protested in Melbourne. And our government and our media then started calling Posey Parker and her supporters and these women in New Zealand neo-Nazis. And it is a label that at the drop of a hat, our mainstream media and the trolls on social media will put on people. There's Godwin's law, right?
Yeah.
No argument where we did. But God, it's so common. And I think that I personally find it, though I am not Jewish, I'm not of any faith, I find it remarkable that we allow people to get away with bandying that term around.
Yes. By the way, I consider myself Jewish by ethnic background, and I'm a secular humanist in terms of my beliefs. But, the fact that my father also had not been raised in a religious tradition in Germany, but given his ancestry as Jewish, that was enough for him to be put into a concentration camp. And I think it undermines the horrors of the Holocaust with respect to not only Jews, but also Roma, communists, LGBTQ people. I mean, actual genocide. To casually bandy about the term Nazi or neo-Nazi with respect to people who simply disagree about details of social policy. And I don't mean to minimize the importance of those debates, but Sean, they are on a different order of magnitude. Yeah. And the hyperbolic rhetoric I hear, oh, you are denying my humanity. Oh, you are advocating or promoting genocide. I mean, yes, the differences may be important. I may feel very strongly about who gets to compete in sports and who gets to use which bathrooms, but that is not on the same order of magnitude. No
way. And I think any reasonable person can see that. We have a group in New Zealand, which I've been looking at and been cynical about for a year, called the Disinformation Project. I'm not sure if you've heard of them
Yeah,
yet.
I have.
And the Disinformation Project said that the levels of online hate against trans and rainbow people as a result of Posey Parker's visit have reached genocidal proportions, and that we can't show you this evidence because it's so scary you wouldn't be able to handle it. Now, this is classic, I call it cry bullying. I'll kill myself if you say anything nasty about me. It's bullshit. And I'm sorry, I'm just going to be, that's the way I speak. This is rubbish.
Well, the concept of disinformation, and I'm putting that in scare quotes, has the same problem as the concept of hate speech or extremist speech or terrorist speech, name any controversial speech you want. The concepts are so inherently subjective. One person's idea of disinformation, or what Donald Trump called fake news, is somebody else's cherished truth. And I think we cannot delegate to an unaccountable group of experts or even an accountable group of government officials to take that decision, that analysis, away from us. Let us see the evidence. Let us hear the different perspectives and make our own decisions.
Well, the problem again here is our mainstream media, and these people will not talk to us and me in specific. They hold secret meetings with our mainstream media who publish their rubbish without question uniformly across all major news platforms. and no questions are ever asked.
You know, that I think a healthy degree of skepticism is really important, and so I'm glad. I think, you know, at one extreme, if there's too much distrust in major institutions, that's bad for democracy. But if there's too much credulity and, you know, lack of a healthy degree of criticism and skepticism, that's also unhealthy for democracy. So I'm a little bit relieved to hear that people are starting to question and say, you know, I'm not just going to accept it on your assertion. Show me the evidence. Let me examine the evidence. Let me hear other perspectives about it. Yeah.
So look, you've talked at Auckland University. Where are you talking tonight? You're doing...
So sorry, I don't know the answer to that.
Has someone got the schedule? We'll just bring the schedule over.
Because it's very...
I
know I'm talking nonstop, and I am speaking at a university here this evening.
Yeah.
And...
Just tell Ben can talk. Just tell Ben there, and
Dr. Paula Martin is telling.
Ben, you can do a quick impromptu plug here. There we go.
Thanks, Ben. Thanks, Paul.
Okay, so we have News Talk, lecture at Pipitea campus.
Yep.
What time is that?
What time's that? Ben at Pipitea. What time is the Pipitea? What time is the Pipitea lecture?
Pipitea lecture. 7 to 7:30.
7 to 7:30 tonight. Is that free?
It's going to be longer than that. It's open to the public.
Open 7 to 7:30. Open to the public.
It's open to the public, and the format is very much question and answer. I really look forward to interaction, and the harder and more challenging the questions, the better. People who disagree with what I've said are especially welcome, because I'd love to have the chance to interact and engage.
Yeah. And anything more? That's it? Then you're back home to the state?
No. Then I have...
come on, Ben. We want the rest. We want the rest of the tour.
Thank you so much.
So then it's down to Christchurch, is it, Paula? No? Where?
After Tauranga next. Free Kiwis podcast recording, 9:30 to 10:30.
No. I just want the public events.
Tauranga. Trinity Wharf.
What?
Trinity Wharf and Tauranga.
Yeah. Trinity Wharf and Tauranga. What night's that?
That is...
Friday night? Yep.
Friday night, yep.
And then there's something in Auckland on Saturday again.
I got a party in Auckland Saturday. I'm going up talking. I won't be able to come along.
Oh.
All right. So, guys, and where can they find this online, Paul? If they go to the Free Speech Union online, you'll have details of all of this.
Thank you so much. I look forward to meeting some of your fan base.
You will now get the platform bump. And it is important that, and in this country, as I said, it's easy for us to get insular. And we need, I think, outside perspectives on what's going on. And I think at times, I said to Posey Parker before she came here, I said, do you think you're having a rough time in Aussie? I said, things are pretty weird here. And we talked after and said, you were right.
And in the United States as well. You know, despite our vaunted First Amendment free speech guarantee, which has been very strongly enforced by the United States Supreme Court, we have a culture that is quite hostile to free speech. And public opinion surveys show that people are dramatically self-censoring, including on university campuses, where you would expect free speech to be the most robust.
I get young people ringing the show and saying, thank God I can ring up and talk to you. If I said this at varsity, I wouldn't be able to go to my lectures and I would be socially ostracised for doing it. And I'll be honest, my young staff here occasionally go to things, they've lost friends over working for the platform.
And so this shows that despite the legal differences among our countries, we face similar challenges and similar opportunities, because you can't be an activist without being an optimist. And that is that each of us, including you and your young staff members and people who come on your show, are making such a meaningful difference in turning around the free speech culture. And maybe the advantage of a smaller country, as you indicated, that you can turn it around more quickly to be more hospitable toward free speech.
Do you think free speech is winning, Nadine?
I do. I really do. And it's interesting. A number of analysts I admire in the United States, including those who work with free speech organizations such as John Haidt's Heterodox Academy, FIRE, the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression, a number have been saying that there is data that indicates that we are at an inflection point now. And so the more we exercise and advocate for free speech, the more other people will be emboldened to speak up, Sean, because studies in my country show that it is ultimately only about 8% on either end of the ideological spectrum who are illiberal in the sense of wanting to suppress other voices.
They are dominating the landscape at the moment.
And we cannot allow them to do that. We have to keep raising our voices and providing platforms for these alternative perspectives. And social psychology shows we human beings, sadly, are conformists, but that also means that once a few start speaking out, it becomes much easier for others in that now silent majority to also speak out. So I'm optimistic, and thank you for contributing to the optimism.
Well, thanks for joining us. That has been a fascinating half hour. Folks, if you want to listen to this, Platform Plus member, the replay is up. We'll replay after close of play 4 o'clock today, and it'll be in our podcast section for the next week. And that has been a fascinating conversation.